He said you'd never survive without me. The words still echoed in Claire Bennett's mind as the courthouse doors closed behind her with a hollow metallic thud, sealing off the life she had once believed was permanent. The November wind cut through her thin wool coat as she stepped onto the granite steps, clutching the small hand of her 6-year-old son, Liam, whose fingers trembled but did not let go. Around them, downtown Chicago moved on without hesitation. Yellow cabs honked in irritated bursts. Suited men strode past with takeaway coffee and urgent phone calls. Somewhere, a siren wailed and faded into the gray skyline. Ethan Cole stood at the top of the steps, framed by glass and polished steel, his posture relaxed in the way of a man certain he had already won. He adjusted the cuff of his tailored navy suit and gave Claire a polite, almost sympathetic smile that cut deeper than any harsh word. "You'll be fine," he had said inside the courtroom, his voice low and even, like he was discussing a quarterly report instead of dismantling a marriage. "You always land on your feet." She had nodded because there was nothing else to do. The judge's gavel had already fallen. The assets were gone. The house overlooking Lake Michigan, with its sunlit breakfast nook and quiet Sunday mornings, now belonged to him. The company she had helped him build from a cramped one-bedroom startup office had been signed away in legal language she could barely breathe through. All that remained was a modest settlement wired into an account that felt like an afterthought. As she descended the steps, Liam tugged gently at her sleeve. "Mom, are we going home?" His voice was soft, careful, as if loud words might shatter what little was left. Claire forced a smile she did not feel and brushed a strand of chestnut hair from his eyes. "We're going somewhere new," she said. The words tasted like uncertainty and possibility all at once. Behind them, Ethan's laughter drifted through the revolving doors, mingling with the sharp scent of winter and city exhaust. He was already on the phone, already talking about expansion, acquisitions, a future that did not include her. To him, this was closure. A clean break. A necessary correction to a story that had grown inconvenient. He believed he had erased her from the narrative of his success. Claire reached the curb and hailed a rideshare with shaking hands. As the car pulled away, the skyline blurred into streaks of silver and charcoal. She stared at her reflection in the tinted window, searching for the woman she used to be. She saw exhaustion, fear, and beneath it, something quieter, harder to name. Not hope, not yet, but a spark, faint as the first light before dawn. She tightened her grip on Liam's hand and whispered, so softly even she could barely hear it, "We'll build something better." In the distance, the towers of the financial district rose like silent witnesses, unaware that the woman disappearing into traffic would one day return not to ask for her place back, but to redefine what power looked like. For now, she vanished into the cold, carrying nothing but a child, a promise, and the beginning of an empire no one could see. Spring arrived quietly in the small Indiana town where Claire Bennett rebuilt her life, measured not in grand milestones, but in ordinary mornings that began before sunrise and ended long after the streetlights flickered on. Her apartment sat above a laundromat on a corner that smelled of detergent and burnt coffee, the kind of place most people passed without noticing. But to Claire it felt like neutral ground, a space untouched by the echoes of courtrooms and polished boardrooms. She woke each day at 5:30, the soft blue glow of dawn stretching across the worn kitchen table where her laptop waited like a silent challenge. Liam slept in the next room, his steady breathing the rhythm that kept her moving forward even when exhaustion pressed against her bones like a heavy coat. She took freelance accounting work at first, small contracts that paid by the hour and demanded precision she delivered without complaint, and when the numbers no longer frightened her, she began to see patterns, possibilities, opportunities hidden in the margins of struggling businesses that others had already written off. It was in one of those early mornings that she met Noah Bennett again, not by design, but by chance, when he walked into the community business workshop she had signed up for, carrying a dented briefcase and the cautious optimism of a man who had once been underestimated too many times. Ethan had laughed at Noah years ago, dismissing him as an idealist with impractical dreams about renewable energy and ethical investments. And Claire had remembered that laughter when Noah sat across from her at a folding table and spread out sketches of solar grids and local partnerships that could transform forgotten industrial spaces into thriving hubs of clean power. They spoke for hours that day, the hum of fluorescent lights above them and the distant rumble of freight trains underscoring a conversation that felt less like networking and more like recognition. Claire did not tell him everything about her past, only enough to explain the steel behind her calm voice and the reason she refused to chase shortcuts. Together they began to build something that grew slowly, deliberately, like a foundation poured one careful inch at a time. She studied market trends late into the night while Liam colored pictures of bright houses with red doors beside her, and Noah drove hundreds of miles across the Midwest pitching their vision to small-town councils and skeptical investors who had never heard of either of them. There were setbacks that felt like storms, contracts that dissolved without warning, bank balances that dipped low enough to make her chest tighten, but each challenge seemed to strengthen the quiet resolve taking root inside her. She learned to negotiate without apology, to walk into rooms filled with seasoned executives and speak with a clarity that commanded attention even when her heels were scuffed and her suit was bought on sale. On weekends, she took Liam to the local park, watching him race across open fields under wide American skies, while she returned phone calls and drafted proposals on a notepad balanced against her knee. Months turned into years, and the small startup with its borrowed office space and second-hand desks began to attract notice, then respect, then a cautious kind of admiration. Claire felt the shift before she could see it on paper, sensed it in the way conversations paused when she entered a room, and in the way Noah started calling their work an empire with a half-amused smile. She never corrected him, because somewhere deep inside she had begun to believe it too. By the time the invitation arrived, Claire Bennett had almost forgotten what it felt like to hesitate. The envelope was thick cream paper edged in silver, her name printed in precise lettering that reflected a world she had once fled without looking back. She stood in the glass-walled office overlooking miles of solar panels that shimmered like quiet promises under the late afternoon sun, the hum of clean energy vibrating faintly through the floor beneath her heels. Noah leaned against the doorway with a knowing expression, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened in a way that spoke of long days and victories earned inch by inch. The conference in Chicago was not just another networking event. It was a summit where the future of American energy would be negotiated in boardrooms filled with men who had once dismissed them as idealists. Claire turned the envelope over in her hands, feeling the weight of years contained in a single decision. Liam, now taller and full of easy laughter, was at home finishing a science project about wind turbines, a small reminder of how far their lives had traveled from that cramped apartment above the laundromat. She remembered the granite courthouse steps and the sharp winter wind that had stripped everything familiar from her grasp. She remembered Ethan Cole standing in the doorway of her past like a man certain he controlled the ending. The thought no longer tightened her chest. It settled instead like a distant echo, something she could observe without fear. The night of the summit arrived with the kind of golden glow reserved for early summer in the Midwest. Warm air drifting through the open windows of the chauffeured car as it carried Claire and Noah toward the skyline that had once felt like a fortress. Downtown Chicago rose ahead of them in steel and light, each tower reflecting the others in a silent conversation about ambition and legacy. Inside the convention center, crystal chandeliers cast soft halos across polished marble floors, while quiet conversations about billion-dollar investments blended with the distant clink of glassware. Claire walked beside Noah with measured confidence, her tailored ivory suit a deliberate choice that balanced elegance with authority. She was no longer the woman who shrank from attention. She had become the architect of spaces where attention followed her naturally. When the keynote session began, she took her place at the head table, the murmur of recognition moving through the crowd like a slow tide. Somewhere in the audience, a familiar presence shifted the air before she even saw him. Ethan stood near the back, his once impeccable posture slightly rigid as he studied the stage with a look that hovered between disbelief and reluctant admiration. Years had carved subtle lines around his eyes, softening the certainty he had worn like armor. Claire met his gaze for only a moment before turning back to the room, the past acknowledged but no longer powerful. As she began to speak about building sustainable empires that could outlast individual ambition, her voice carried across the hall with calm authority, each word a testament to resilience rather than revenge. She did not need to prove anything to him. The empire she had built was already doing that on its own. The applause lingered in the air long after Claire Bennett stepped away from the podium, a soft rolling echo that seemed to follow her through the corridors of glass and steel as evening settled over the city. Outside, the Chicago River reflected the amber glow of streetlights and the distant pulse of traffic, turning the skyline into a living constellation that shimmered with promise and memory. She moved through clusters of investors and journalists with steady grace, accepting congratulations and measured handshakes, her voice calm and warm even as the weight of recognition pressed gently against her shoulders. Noah remained at her side, an unspoken anchor in the tide of attention, his quiet smile signaling both pride and relief that their years of relentless work had finally crossed into something undeniable. Across the hall, Ethan Cole watched her with an intensity that surprised even himself, as though he were trying to reconcile the composed leader commanding the room with the woman he once believed would fade into obscurity. He remembered winter mornings filled with ambition and certainty, remembered the way he had convinced himself that success required sacrifice, and that sacrifice had worn Claire's face. Now the certainty felt thinner, replaced by a growing awareness that he had misunderstood the very foundation of strength. When she finally approached him, it was not with triumph or bitterness, but with the quiet dignity of someone who had already made peace with the past. Their conversation unfolded beneath the muted glow of a chandelier, voices low enough to remain private in a room alive with ambition. He spoke first, offering an apology that sounded unfamiliar even to his own ears, shaped by years of reflection he had never intended to undertake. Claire listened without interruption, her expression thoughtful rather than guarded, as if she were measuring not his words but the distance they had both traveled. She did not dwell on old wounds or recount the nights she had stared at spreadsheets under flickering lights, wondering if resilience alone could keep her world from collapsing. Instead, she spoke about vision, about the way adversity had sharpened her purpose until fear no longer dictated her choices. Beyond the tall windows, summer rain began to fall in gentle sheets, blurring the neon reflections on the pavement and filling the air with the scent of renewal. Ethan followed her gaze and felt something inside him shift, an acceptance that the narrative he had written for their lives had never been complete. When Noah joined them, extending a cordial handshake that carried neither resentment nor rivalry, the three of them stood for a moment in unexpected stillness, united not by the past, but by the realization that futures could be rewritten without erasing what came before. As the evening drew to a close, Claire stepped out onto the terrace overlooking the river, the cool mist settling lightly against her skin. She thought of Liam waiting at home with his science project and of the long road that had transformed survival into purpose. The empire she had helped create was no longer just a business. It was a testament to quiet endurance, to partnerships built on trust rather than dominance. Behind her, the music of the gala softened into the distance, and the city stretched out like an open horizon, inviting her forward into chapters still unwritten. The rain had stopped by the time Claire Bennett returned to the quiet penthouse suite reserved for speakers at the summit, leaving the night air washed clean and the city lights sharper than before, like stars pulled closer to earth. She slipped off her heels and crossed the polished hardwood floor, pausing at the wide window that framed Chicago in silver and gold reflections, her breath fogging the glass for a fleeting moment before disappearing just as quickly as the doubts she once carried. Down on the street, traffic flowed in patient streams, headlights stretching into glowing ribbons that reminded her of the long journey that had led her back to this skyline not as a visitor, but as a force reshaping its future. Her phone vibrated softly in her hand, a message from Liam filled with a photo of his completed wind turbine model and a simple caption that read, "Proud of you, Mom," and she smiled with a warmth that spread through her chest like sunrise. Success, she realized, had never been about reclaiming anything Ethan had taken. It had been about creating something so meaningful that loss itself lost its power. The next morning dawned bright and cloudless, the kind of clear Midwestern sky that promised possibility, and Claire joined Noah on the terrace outside the conference center where early sunlight glinted off the river like 1,000 quiet affirmations. They reviewed contracts and expansion plans over coffee, their conversation steady and focused, each decision building toward projects that would bring sustainable energy to towns long overlooked by progress. Inside, Ethan moved through the departing crowd with a thoughtful expression, the previous night's encounter lingering in his mind like a turning point he had not anticipated. When he approached Claire once more, his voice carried a different tone, one shaped by humility rather than habit, and he spoke of partnership opportunities instead of apologies. She listened with calm consideration, weighing not his past, but the potential for a future that could benefit communities far beyond their personal history. It was not reconciliation he sought, and not vindication she desired, but something quieter and more enduring, a shared acknowledgement that growth often began in the space left by endings. Together they walked along the riverwalk as morning commuters hurried past, the city alive with the hum of ordinary ambition, and Claire felt a profound sense of completion that had nothing to do with winning or losing. She had built an empire from patience, vision, and the courage to believe in beginnings that no one else could see. As she prepared to leave for the airport, Noah handed her a folder outlining their next venture, a project that would expand their reach across the country and redefine what responsible leadership could look like in a changing world. Claire looked out once more at the skyline, remembering the frightened woman who had once vanished into winter traffic, and then she stepped forward into the bright day, certain that the chapters ahead would be written not by circumstance, but by the quiet power she had learned to trust. The flight home felt shorter than usual, as though time itself had begun to bend in Claire Bennett's favor, compressing the distance between who she had been and the woman she had become. When the plane descended through a band of soft white clouds, and the familiar patchwork of Midwestern farmland appeared below, she rested her forehead lightly against the cool window and allowed herself a rare moment of stillness. The fields stretched for miles in orderly squares of green and gold, wind turbines turning in patient rhythm against the wide blue sky, silent reminders of the vision she and Noah had once sketched on wrinkled paper in a fluorescent-lit classroom. At the small regional airport, Liam was waiting near the arrival gate with a cardboard sign decorated in bright marker that read "Welcome Home, Mom." The uneven letters surrounded by hand-drawn lightning bolts and tiny solar panels. His grin widened as soon as he spotted her, and he ran forward with a joyful energy that erased the last traces of fatigue from her body. She knelt to embrace him, breathing in the familiar scent of sunshine and laundry detergent that meant she was truly home. Outside, the afternoon air carried the gentle warmth of early summer, cicadas humming in distant trees and the horizon shimmering with heat. Life here moved at a different pace than the gleaming corridors of corporate summits. But Claire had come to understand that real transformation often began in places the world overlooked. Back at the headquarters she had built with Noah, a converted warehouse filled with natural light and the quiet whir of innovation, employees gathered to hear updates from the conference. Their faces reflected hope and determination, a shared belief that their work mattered beyond profit margins. Claire spoke to them about expansion plans, about bringing clean energy to towns still waiting for opportunity, about the responsibility that came with influence. Her voice carried the calm conviction of someone who had learned that leadership was not measured in dominance, but in the ability to inspire others to see further than fear allowed. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, she sat on the rooftop terrace with Noah reviewing blueprints for their next project. He listened thoughtfully as she outlined ideas that would push their company into new territory, his eyes reflecting the same quiet excitement she felt stirring inside her chest. In the distance, wind turbines turned like steady guardians against the fading light, and Claire realized that the empire they were building was no longer a distant dream, but a living presence shaping the landscape around them. Her phone buzzed with a message from Ethan, brief and respectful, asking for a meeting to discuss collaborative initiatives that could benefit communities in need. She read the words without tension, sensing the subtle shift in the balance of their history. The past no longer cast a shadow over her future. It simply existed as a chapter that had taught her how to rise. As night settled over the town and the first stars appeared, Claire looked out across the quiet streets and felt a deep, unwavering certainty. The journey ahead would demand courage and vision, but she had already proven to herself that both were within her reach. The meeting was scheduled for a quiet Thursday morning when the sun rose slowly over rows of newly installed solar panels, casting long shadows that stretched across the gravel like reminders of how far Claire Bennett had traveled from the days she once feared every unknown. She arrived at the headquarters before anyone else, the glass doors reflecting a woman who no longer searched for permission to take up space. Inside, the building hummed with a gentle, purposeful energy, computers warming to life and distant voices drifting through open offices as employees began their day. She paused at her desk, fingers resting lightly on the folder Noah had prepared, the outline of potential partnerships detailed in careful bullet points that represented not just business opportunities, but the possibility of reshaping entire communities. Outside, the sky was a brilliant Midwestern blue, the kind that made everything feel possible. When Ethan Cole walked in precisely at 9 o'clock, he did so with the composure of someone who had learned the value of humility, his tailored suit still impeccable, but his expression softer, less certain of controlling outcomes. Claire greeted him with calm professionalism, offering coffee and a seat near the wide window where sunlight poured in like a quiet witness to the moment. Their conversation unfolded gradually, beginning with cautious discussion about market trends and regional investments before shifting toward something deeper, an acknowledgement that the past had carved lessons into both of them in ways neither had expected. Ethan spoke of mistakes he could not undo, of ambitions that once felt urgent but now seemed hollow without purpose. Claire listened without judgment, recognizing that growth rarely followed the path anyone planned. Noah joined them shortly after, his presence steady and collaborative, and together they mapped out initiatives that would bring renewable infrastructure to struggling towns where factories had long since closed and hope had thinned to a fragile thread. As they worked, the atmosphere shifted from tension to possibility, the air filled with the quiet excitement of building something meaningful rather than proving anything personal. Hours passed almost unnoticed, punctuated by the distant whir of turbines and the occasional laughter from employees who believed in the future they were helping to shape. When the meeting concluded, Ethan lingered by the window, watching sunlight ripple across fields that once symbolized failure but now represented renewal. He turned to Claire with a look that held gratitude instead of regret, understanding that she had never returned to confront him but to move beyond him entirely. Later that afternoon, Claire drove home along a country road lined with wildflowers swaying in the breeze, the horizon stretching wide and open before her. Liam waited on the porch with a stack of school papers and 1,000 questions about the summit, his curiosity a constant reminder that tomorrow was always being written. As evening settled and the first stars appeared above the quiet town, Claire felt the familiar spark of purpose settle into her chest once more, a steady flame guiding her toward chapters still waiting to unfold. The weeks that followed moved with a quiet momentum that felt almost like destiny unfolding in real time, each sunrise bringing new contracts, new responsibilities, and new reminders that Claire Bennett was no longer building in the shadows. Autumn arrived early that year, painting the rolling Midwest landscape in warm shades of amber and copper, the wind carrying the scent of harvested fields and distant rain. At headquarters, the energy had shifted from hopeful anticipation to confident execution, employees moving through sunlit offices with the focused rhythm of a team that understood their work mattered beyond spreadsheets and quarterly projections. Claire spent her mornings reviewing site plans and expansion timelines, her voice steady as she outlined strategies that balanced growth with sustainability, her leadership no longer questioned but quietly relied upon. Noah remained her closest collaborator, their partnership forged through years of resilience and mutual respect, and together they began traveling across neighboring states to oversee the installation of new renewable facilities that transformed forgotten industrial zones into thriving centers of innovation. On one crisp October afternoon, as golden leaves drifted across the pavement like fragments of memory, Claire stood at the edge of a newly completed solar farm that stretched for miles under a pale blue sky, its mirrored panels reflecting sunlight in dazzling waves. A small crowd of local residents had gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and cautious hope. When she stepped forward to speak, the microphone cool against her fingers, she felt the weight of their expectations settle into her voice, urging her to be not just a business leader, but a symbol of what reinvention could achieve. She spoke about opportunity, about building futures where limitations once stood, about the quiet courage required to begin again when everything familiar had been stripped away. As applause rose into the open air, she caught sight of Ethan standing at the back of the gathering, hands clasped and eyes thoughtful, no longer an adversary but a witness to the transformation he had once believed impossible. Their brief exchange afterward was simple and respectful, marked by an understanding that collaboration had replaced rivalry, and that the empire now taking shape belonged not to past grievances but to shared purpose. That evening, Claire returned home beneath a sky streaked with lavender clouds, Liam running to greet her with stories of school projects and new friendships, his laughter filling the small house with a warmth no corporate success could replicate. She watched the horizon fade into darkness, the distant turbines turning steadily against the night, and realized that every step forward had been guided by a choice to trust herself when no one else could see her path. The future stretched before her like an open road illuminated by possibility, and she felt ready to continue walking it without fear. Winter arrived with a quiet authority that settled over the Midwest like a silver veil, transforming fields of gold into landscapes of frost and stillness that reflected the deeper calm Claire Bennett now carried within herself. The headquarters buzzed with renewed intensity as the company prepared for its most ambitious expansion yet, a multi-state initiative that would connect rural communities to sustainable power and reshape economic futures long defined by scarcity. Inside the glass-lined conference room, maps covered entire walls, dotted with markers that represented towns ready to believe again. And Claire stood at the center of it all with the composed assurance of someone who had learned that leadership was not about control, but about vision strong enough to guide others through uncertainty. Noah moved beside her with easy confidence, reviewing timelines and coordinating teams whose dedication had become the quiet engine behind their success. Beyond the windows, snow fell in soft, endless patterns, muting the world outside and creating a sense of focus that sharpened every decision made within those walls. Late one afternoon, as the first phase of construction officially launched, Claire traveled to a small riverside town where abandoned factories once cast long shadows across empty streets. Now cranes rose against a pale sky, their steady movement a symbol of renewal that drew residents to the site with cautious curiosity. She spoke with local leaders over steaming cups of coffee in a modest diner that smelled of cinnamon and fresh bread, listening to stories of lost opportunities and fragile hopes, her responses measured yet sincere. When she stepped outside, the crisp air filled her lungs and she felt the familiar spark of purpose ignite once more, a reminder that every mile of progress had been built on moments like this. Among the crowd, she noticed Ethan standing near the edge of the construction zone, his coat dusted with snow, his expression thoughtful as he watched the transformation unfolding before him. Their conversation was brief but meaningful, centered on shared goals rather than past missteps. And when he offered assistance in securing additional investment, she recognized not ambition but genuine respect in his tone. As dusk painted the sky in shades of indigo and rose, Claire walked along the frozen riverbank, her footsteps echoing softly against the ice-lined shore. She thought of Liam studying for exams back home, of Noah finalizing contracts late into the night, of employees who trusted her to lead them toward a future brighter than the one they had inherited. The empire they were building was no longer just a concept born from resilience. It was a living promise carried forward by everyone who believed change was possible. Under the glow of newly installed streetlights powered by their own technology, Claire paused and looked out across the snow-covered landscape, feeling a deep certainty that even in the coldest seasons, growth was already taking root beneath the surface. Spring returned with a sense of quiet inevitability, melting the last traces of winter from the fields and rooftops, as if the world itself were turning a page alongside Claire Bennett. The company headquarters stood brighter in the morning light, its glass facade reflecting rows of wind turbines that moved with a patient grace against the soft blue horizon. Inside, the atmosphere carried a new intensity, one shaped not by uncertainty, but by momentum, as teams prepared for the official unveiling of their largest initiative yet, a nationwide network designed to bring sustainable power to cities and towns that had once been overlooked by progress. Claire walked through the corridors with calm focus, exchanging brief smiles and measured words of encouragement with employees who looked to her not only for direction, but for reassurance that their shared vision was still rooted in purpose. Noah joined her in the main conference room, where large digital screens displayed data points and timelines that stretched months into the future, each milestone representing another step toward reshaping the energy landscape across the country. Together, they reviewed final strategies, their conversation fluid and confident, the years of collaboration between them evident in every quiet nod and unspoken agreement. Outside, reporters began to gather near the entrance, cameras poised to capture what many were already calling a defining moment in modern industry. By midday, the press conference had drawn investors, community leaders, and curious onlookers who sensed they were witnessing more than a business announcement. When Claire stepped onto the stage, sunlight filtered through high windows and framed her in a gentle glow, the hush that settled over the audience carrying the weight of anticipation. She spoke about resilience, about the responsibility that came with influence, about building systems that would endure long after individual ambitions had faded. Her voice remained steady even as flashes from cameras lit the room like distant lightning, and she felt a profound clarity in knowing that every word she offered was grounded in lived experience rather than aspiration alone. Among those listening was Ethan Cole, standing near the back with a thoughtful expression that reflected both admiration and quiet acceptance. He had become an ally in recent months, helping secure resources and partnerships that expanded the reach of their projects, his role evolving into something defined by collaboration rather than competition. After the event, he approached Claire with genuine congratulations, his handshake firm but respectful, as though acknowledging that the narrative they once shared had transformed into a story neither could have predicted. That evening, as the sky shifted from gold to deep indigo, Claire returned home to find Liam waiting with a science fair ribbon pinned proudly to his jacket, his excitement filling the house with laughter and light. She stood on the porch watching fireflies rise from the grass like tiny stars, feeling the steady pulse of possibility guiding her forward. The empire she had helped build was no longer just a testament to survival. It had become a beacon for others searching for their own beginning, and she understood with quiet certainty that the journey ahead would continue to unfold in ways both challenging and extraordinary. Summer deepened with a golden intensity that seemed to linger longer each evening, stretching daylight into a quiet promise that the world still held countless stories waiting to unfold. Claire Bennett found herself standing once more at the edge of a new construction site, this one larger than any they had undertaken before, its framework rising against a wide American sky, like the skeleton of a future already beginning to breathe. Rows of steel beams glinted in the sunlight while engineers moved across the ground with focused determination, their voices carried on the warm breeze that smelled faintly of fresh concrete and cut grass. She had traveled across 3 states in the past week, meeting with local leaders and investors who now spoke her name with a mixture of admiration and expectation, and though fatigue sometimes settled into her shoulders like an uninvited guest, she welcomed the weight as proof that the empire she and Noah had envisioned was no longer fragile. Inside the temporary operations trailer, digital blueprints glowed across large monitors, mapping out timelines that extended well into the coming year, and Claire reviewed them with a calm precision shaped by experience rather than urgency. Noah joined her with 2 cups of strong black coffee, the steam rising between them like a quiet symbol of shared purpose, and together they discussed strategies that would ensure their growth remained grounded in the values that had defined their beginning. Later that afternoon, a convoy of electric vehicles arrived carrying reporters and industry analysts eager to witness the scale of what was taking shape, their questions sharp but respectful as they sought to understand how a company born in modest circumstances had become a national force. Claire answered with measured confidence, speaking not about personal triumph but about collective effort, about the communities whose faith had fueled their momentum when recognition was still a distant horizon. Among the visitors was Ethan Cole, now a familiar presence at major developments, his role in facilitating partnerships earning him quiet credibility in a landscape he once believed he controlled alone. Their conversation beneath a canopy of temporary shade was marked by an ease that surprised them both, the past acknowledged only in the way they listened more carefully to one another's perspectives. As evening approached, the sky softened into shades of peach and lavender, and Claire walked alone along the perimeter of the site, her footsteps stirring dust that caught the last rays of sunlight like fleeting sparks. She thought of Liam preparing for his final year of middle school, of the countless nights she had spent wondering whether resilience could truly reshape destiny, and she felt a profound gratitude for the journey that had taught her to trust her own voice. When she returned to headquarters the next day, employees greeted her with updates and quiet smiles, their dedication reinforcing the understanding that leadership was never a solitary path. Standing by the wide windows that framed miles of turbines turning steadily in the distance, Claire allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. The future no longer felt like something to chase. It had become something she was already living, step by deliberate step. Autumn returned once again with a softer light that turned the landscape into a living canvas of amber and gold, the wind carrying the quiet promise of change through the wide open fields that now gleamed with rows of turbines and solar arrays stretching beyond the horizon. Claire Bennett stood at the center of a newly completed operations campus that symbolized more than corporate success, its glass and steel architecture reflecting a future she had once only dared to imagine during long nights of uncertainty. Employees moved through the grounds with purposeful energy, their conversations blending with the steady hum of technology that powered communities miles away, and Claire felt a deep sense of connection to every decision that had brought them here. Noah walked beside her as they prepared for the opening ceremony, his presence as reassuring as ever, the years of shared effort evident in the way they anticipated each other's thoughts without needing words. Reporters and local families gathered along the pathways, curious children pointing toward the towering blades that cut gracefully through the sky, their parents speaking in hopeful tones about opportunities returning to towns that had almost given up on tomorrow. When Claire took the stage, the afternoon sun warmed her shoulders and illuminated faces filled with expectation, reminding her that leadership was not about recognition but about responsibility. She spoke about resilience shaped by experience, about partnerships that grew stronger through adversity, and about the quiet power of believing in beginnings when endings seemed inevitable. As applause carried across the open grounds, she caught sight of Ethan standing among the guests, his expression thoughtful and steady, no longer defined by past certainty, but by a willingness to support the future they were building together. Their exchange afterward was marked by genuine respect, a shared understanding that growth had transformed rivalry into collaboration, and that the empire rising around them belonged to everyone who chose hope over doubt. Later that evening, as twilight settled in gentle shades of violet and silver, Claire returned home to find Liam studying at the kitchen table, his textbooks spread out beneath the warm glow of a single lamp. They shared dinner and laughter, simple moments that grounded her more deeply than any public achievement ever could. Stepping outside onto the porch, she watched the first stars appear above the quiet town, their steady light echoing the turbines turning slowly in the distance. She realized that success was no longer a destination she pursued, but a journey she lived every day, shaped by the courage to move forward even when the path remained unseen. The future stretched ahead with an openness that felt both humbling and exhilarating, and Claire welcomed it with the calm certainty of someone who had already proven that reinvention was not only possible but powerful. Winter returned for the final time in a way that felt less like an ending and more like a quiet closing chapter. Snow drifting across the wide Midwest plains in soft, patient spirals that turned every rooftop and field into a blank page, waiting for new stories to be written. Claire Bennett stood on the observation deck of the company headquarters. As dawn slowly painted the horizon in shades of pale gold and silver, her breath forming gentle clouds in the cold air, while the turbines beyond the river moved with their familiar, steady grace. Years had passed since the day she walked down courthouse steps with nothing but determination and a child's small hand to guide her forward, and now the landscape around her bore the imprint of every choice she had made in silence. Below, Employees arrived early, their cars tracing careful paths through the snow, their laughter and conversations carrying upward like echoes of a shared belief that what they were building mattered. Noah joined her with 2 cups of steaming coffee, his presence as constant as the turning blades in the distance. And together they reviewed the final reports confirming that their network had expanded across the country, powering cities and towns that once felt forgotten. Later that morning, a ceremony was held to mark the completion of their largest project yet. Community leaders and families gathering beneath a bright winter sky to celebrate a future shaped by resilience rather than regret. Claire spoke with calm authority about endurance and partnership, her voice carrying across the open ground with the quiet strength that had defined her journey from the beginning. Among the audience stood Ethan Cole, his posture relaxed and his expression reflective, no longer a symbol of loss, but a reminder of how life could change when pride gave way to understanding. Their brief conversation afterward was filled with gratitude rather than unfinished emotion, each acknowledging that the paths they had taken had led them to this shared horizon of possibility. As evening approached, Claire returned home where Liam, now taller and on the verge of adulthood, helped shovel snow from the driveway before they sat together by the fireplace, the glow of the flames casting warm light across photographs that chronicled years of growth and reinvention. She stepped outside once more under a sky scattered with brilliant stars, the cold air sharp against her skin and the distant hum of turbines blending with the quiet rhythm of her heartbeat. In that stillness, she realized that she had never truly sought revenge or recognition. She had simply chosen to keep moving forward when standing still felt easier. The empire she had built was not defined by wealth or power alone, but by the lives it had touched and the hope it had restored. As the first light of a new day began to rise, Claire allowed herself a small, knowing smile, certain that while one chapter had reached its gentle conclusion, the story of her courage and quiet strength would continue to unfold long after the snow had melted from the fields.